This next introductory digital electronics video is intended to show students how to build a 4-input template for use in digital electronics logic circuits. You'll find in digital electronics that a lot of teachers will ask students to develop a circuit that is both neat, easy to read, and easy to troubleshoot. The easiest way to do this is to start by setting up a template. This template can be used for circuits of any size from this point forward. So we start with the Place menu, which you can get to by Control-W or simply click Place and go to your component list. The first kind of component we're going to need is the SPDT switch, as you can see has been typed up here in the component space. You simply want the SPDT switch that is interactive. Please make sure this is exactly one you have before you proceed. Go ahead and click OK. And we're going to make a 4-input template. Each switch represents one input, so I'm going to do this 3 more times. Now, I have my 4 switches, and that's great. So I'm actually going to close this out for a moment and show you how to proceed. The 4 switches that are here represent each of the inputs. However, each of these switches need to utilize each of the 2 values here that we're going to use as inputs, and we're going to face those upward. The way to do that is to simply click and drag over all 4 items, which highlights them all, and we're simply going to right-click and we're going to rotate them counterclockwise. All right. Now, you can see some of the labeling and things have gotten sort of in the way. Once you've done this, it's a good idea to simply click somewhere else on the screen so the items are no longer highlighted. You can then move the switches around. Some of them may flip back and forth. That's quite all right. All right, and simply space them out where they don't take up too much room, but they're also not too close either. You'll notice that I'm going to move the label here to get it out of the way because it's a little bit inconvenient at the moment. However, I'm going to place the other ones so they're still associated with their various switches, but not too far away. Now, each of the switches has a key equals some value. That particular label is used for the keyboard itself. Currently, with key equal to space, all of my switches will change at the same time should I hit the space bar. I will demonstrate. So notice that all 4 switches will change together, even though they're going in slightly different directions based on how I clicked on them before. All right. Now what I'd like to do is for each one, I'm going to change the setting for the switch. I'm going to double click on the first one, or you can also right click and go to Properties if you like. And you're going to change the key for toggle. Simply a drop-down menu where you have the choice of letters. Typically, switches should have keyboard keys set to values which are next to each other for the ease of testing. The keys I like to use for these 4 switches are easiest as A, S, D, and F. It's on the home row of your keyboard under your left hand. So I'm going to start with A for my first switch. Once I'm done, I will simply click OK. And the idea is now I have key A equal to this switch. So notice when I click A on the keyboard, only that switch should change. Big difference. I'm going to do the same to the other 3 switches using the following letters on the keyboard. I'm going to go ahead and go down to S, select it, and click OK. So now I have a separate key for my second switch, followed by D and F. All right. So now all 4 of my switches have been set, but I need to give them some input values. The reason I've turned the switches upward is so that the 2 values here can be connected to a VCC and a ground, effectively VCC a 1 and ground a 0. So I'm going to place those 2 components by simply finding them first. I'll look for a VCC, one item here, and click OK. Now, a lot of people argue over which side to put VCC on. You can entirely choose whichever one you like. I typically put it on the left. If you like to put it on the right, just be consistent with how you hook up your switches for the ease of use. So I'm going to place my VCC, and I'm also going to place a ground as well. In this case, a digital ground, so D, G, and B. Click OK there. Now, easiest way to do this is to start by connecting your VCC to the side closest on each of the switches. So I'm going to start here. So there's my first VCC wire. I'm going to do the same with the left connector on each of the switches to make it consistent. I'm also going to, in this case, leave my wires red because it makes it much easier to see VCC if it is simply just red. You can change the color whatever you like. By doing the following, you can right-click on the wire itself, and you would want to change the net color. The net indicates any wires hooked up to the individual piece that I've already selected. So in this case, I'm going to leave it red, so I'm not going to make this choice. I'm going to continue on with my ground connections to all of the right-hand side connections of each of my keys, starting with the one furthest from me so I can place my wires how I wish. Now with this one, I'm actually going to change the color now so that any wire I attach to it will not get confused with my other red wire. I'm going to right-click, I'm going to change my net color, and I'd like to make this one green. So I'm going to click OK. From here on out, I'm going to connect from my switches up to my wire. And notice that the wires that follow will also be green. It makes it so much easier to find wires from then on. Continuing on, we now have 4 switches, and now we have an input line. So what I'm going to do is for each one of these switches, now going to drop a wire straight down, about halfway down the page, depending on the size of the sheet that you're working on. And when I do this, I'll drop it straight down. In order to stop my wire, I'm going to double-click. Now that places a wire and automatically makes it red. I'm going to change the color in a minute so that when I place my other parts, everything is spaced nicely. So I'm going to do the same on the other wires here. Simply dropping a wire and double-clicking when I get to the bottom. You can always extend wires from here by simply clicking from the end of the wire here, which has created a node, extending it further and double-clicking to place your wire. Now, wire-wise, I'm going to change the colors now, change the net colors to various colors. I have a scheme for this, which I typically follow. Any of the wires coming directly from the switches, I usually make those the darker versions of the colors I will use for something else in a moment. So I will choose perhaps a dark pink color for this one. And these colors are completely arbitrary. And make sure it's something that you can see the difference of. So I will try to choose, let's say, a dark blue. And let's go with a different green. And let's go with an orange. All right. So hopefully you can see that there are 4 different colors here, which are nice and neatly labeled. Our switches are nicely labeled as well, which helps us out a lot in the near future. Now, when creating this 4-input template, you'll find a lot of your circuits require inverters. The easiest way to create the not versions or the inverted versions of each of these values, we need to simply place inverters. Inverters have a particular component number, so we're going to go to Components. I'm going to type in 74LS04N, and I'm going to select the individual gates and click OK. Now I'm going to need 4 of these items, so I'm going to start with A. Then I'm going to follow on the same component, and I'm going to go to B, C, and D. The reason I'm selecting from the same component here is to simply use up the gates that already exist. If I continue to select from A, eventually I would actually run out of parts that Multisim can handle. So I have 4 of these components. Close this out. I'm going to take these components and actually rotate them now. So I'm going to click and drag and highlight them all, right-click, and I'm going to rotate them clockwise. So now that way I have them all facing downward, which allows an input at the top and an output at the bottom. I'm going to place one next to each of my input wires. And I will set up for the next step. Now what I'd like to do is, since the input wires simply give me my regular input value, let's say my value is called A, by taking that value and placing it through an inverter, I'm creating a value called not A. So I'm going to click and drag and double click again to place my wire. Notice I now have 2 wires running parallel to each other. And I'm going to change the color here so it's a lighter version of the color I have. So that way I have related in my mind as well as in my circuit. Makes it much easier to recognize later on when connecting components. Check my light blue here. And same with the green and the orange as well. Selecting these last 2 colors. Again, completely arbitrary colors. As long as you can see them, they seem perfectly acceptable. I do not recommend yellow, however. So now that my wires are all established, the one last thing you might want to do when setting up this template is to give yourself some labels. The easiest way to do that is to go back to your Place menu and simply place text. The text can be placed anywhere on the Multisim file and dragged around like any other text box in any other program. So in this case, I'm going to simply label my values as A and not A. and I can simply place it next to my wire. Hopefully you've enjoyed how to create a 4-input template for use in digital electronics logic circuits. So just one final note, I just want to add, when you want to create a label for not A or any not value, the best way to do it is to start with the letter in the text box. If you simply go to the left of the letter, as you see my cursor is flashing now, and simply hit enter, then you go back up that one line and use an underscore by holding down Shift and pressing your hyphen key, and you get a not bar, which always looks really nice. So once you do that and click away, you can then move the text box around, and you now have a beautiful label for not A. So I hope this video has been very instructional and helpful to you in setting up your 4-input template. Any questions or concerns, consult your teacher.